Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, the black and gold standard for Pittsburgh Steelers coverage. Now, here are your hosts, Joe Kuzma and Brian E. Roach.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. My name is Joe Kuzma, and today I am joined by my Ken to my Ryu, a street fighter in his own right, Mr. Brian E. Roach. Brian, how you doing, man? I was asking you about the video game stuff off the air. I cut you off, and I don't know. I know you're a much older man than I am. I was just wondering how much of the video games that you play.
Much? You used the term much? How rude. Anyway, you ageist guy, you.
Only against you, old man.
I understand. Get off my lawn. But it's funny you picked the Street Fighter references is probably one of the few games I never played.
Interesting.
I was not a Street Fighter guy. I was much more an RPG guy. Okay. Zelda was my jam, man. That was my Jimmy jam.
Oh, you know what? I love Zelda. The original Zelda 2, there's a special place in hell for that game. And then the Super Nintendo had the third one, which is I think the penultimate. And I think they're actually making kind of a pseudo sequel for that somewhere. But yeah, I even got the newest one on the Switch. I'm not too much of a modern gamer, and those of you who follow my personal account know I get into the retro game stuff. But as trying to find any type of duos to compare me and Brian with, I was like, maybe Street Fighter's safe. I think some of our audience may know the Street Fighter stuff, and somebody will say it's Ryu or Ryu or whatever. I don't care. I really don't. In fact, Street Fighter, I was a Mortal Kombat guy. But I was thinking about all this because I've been playing in the arcades. There's a lot of these barcades and arcade machines popping up at different places, even craft breweries or some restaurants even have one sitting in the back now of somewhere the store or wherever. And these are mostly older machines. I did go to a place that was a laser tag type thing, took my kid over the weekend, and they had a newer updated Ninja Turtles type thing, and that game was really cool. But I know that was Ninja Turtles wasn't really your thing. You were much older. You were probably into Howdy Doody and playing with jacks. So
no, Howdy Doody. Look, that's creepy. That's creepy, weird, evil crap right there. That's just wrong. No, but I will tell you, when the first Asteroids machine came out, when the first Space Invaders machine came out, I was playing them.
Yeah, I mean, that's the golden era of arcades. I read a wonderful book on that, too. I mean, there's some really great stories, but I digress. I mean, it was just something that popped into my brain. I'm like, I wonder, I'm always trying to get references that, the plethora of our audience would actually, understand, but then I was wondering if my co-host would get it, so that's always a challenge too. Anyways, I mean, Mario and Luigi's really safe. I thought about Sonic and Tails, and then I was thinking with the Sega Genesis, you'd be more like Knuckles anyways, because you're the grumpy old guy. So
yeah,
but
I'm with you.
Yeah, I mean, or you'd be the villain maybe you'd be like a Bowser or an Eggman or something like that. I could see you
Let me ask you this:
plots.
since you brought up that the whole Sega and Nintendo thing, were you a all games all the time kind of guy? In other words, didn't matter what the system was, you had all the systems, or were you a system-based guy?
Well, I mean, when I was younger, it wasn't like my parents were flush with money where, I was wiping my butt with dollar bills. So, I saved up some money. I used to get an allowance. I got a Nintendo, the original Nintendo, with at least part of whatever I got from allowance. I was probably 6 or 7 years old at that time. And, everybody had Mario. It came packed in, and Duck Hunt with the light gun thing that, they would probably ban in 2019. The dog laughing at you too, the bullying, we can't have any of that. But yeah, and I had Mario 2, and I was like, what is this? This is strange. And then Mario 3 was the big thing. And then I got a Super Nintendo, and I was one of the few people who had a Super Nintendo where all my friends had Sega Genesis. But I did play both because, I was about the age where, you would go and visit or have sleepovers and that type of thing. And I could ride my bike to a friend's house. My neighbor had, actually my first John Madden football experience, I think it was 19 1993 John Madden Football was on the Sega Genesis at my neighbor's, and then I had Madden 94 and like 95 or 96, whichever year the Browns ended up leaving. They were like they were in the game as like a kind of a shell of a team. They weren't a real team, and then they had the expansion teams too with the Carolina Panthers and the Jaguars and the Ravens, and they added, I think, Fox Sports branding into the game, where it had the da-da-da-da-da kind of theme thing and everything in 16-bit audio, obviously, or whatever the audio thing is there. Yeah. And that was like the bee's knees, man. That was really cool up until the PlayStation 2 came out. And then in that kind of era, yeah, I kind of delved into every console because I've pretty much had all the Nintendo stuff over the years. I know there's Sony and Microsoft fanboys. At one point I had like all of that stuff. Right now I only have the Switch. I don't have an Xbox One or a PS4, but I have a PS3, a 360, and I even had the Wii U. So I kind of, going on my retro thing and kind of going off a little too far with maybe our football fans here. There's somewhat of a point to this originally, but Brian posed me the question. I had to answer it. And besides, it's June. There isn't a whole lot of football stuff to talk about except for all these hypothetical type of things. I've got some major pet peeves coming in an episode or two based on some of these football magazines that I'm reading. But anyways, it kind of ties in the Madden football thing over the years. Once it came out on the disc-based systems, at least like a year or two after the PS2 maybe dropped, and the Dreamcast too. The Dreamcast had NFL 2K series, which was all phenomenal. That's when the football games really, really, really took off for me.
Yeah, I played Tecmo Bowl, man.
Oh, I wasn't very good at that, but I got a Tecmo Bowl story that ties into the Steelers here. So maybe this was about 2 years ago, and one of my wife's cousins, it was around the holidays, and I want to say it was maybe like Christmas Eve or something, and we all go over to this guy's house, and he was kind of building a rec room in the basement, so he had like one of these big like 50-inch screen TVs and an original Nintendo somehow hooked up to it. I didn't even think they still had like the old RCA connections on some of these fancier TVs, right? And of course he has Tecmo Bowl, and a younger cousin, usually the one I make fun of that goes to games with me, not the older cousin who's a lot more intelligent with football and just not a dumbass, for lack of better terms. Sorry, Mike, I love you, but you picked the Steelers when I took the 49ers in Tecmo Bowl, and that just wasn't very smart when you have Dwight Hands of Stone and Bubby Brister and Merrill Hodge up against like Joe Montana, Jerry Rice, who was in the backfield of that game. I think it was still Roger Craig. I mean, it was just so unfair, and we're actually, this ties into part of the topic for today, Brian, because we're talking about Joe Montana, believe it or not. NFL Network, I understand. They're just like us. They're looking for things to talk about, right? It's the off season. There's not a whole lot going on. And in order to, captivate an audience or just maybe fill programming time, which it really is no different than us. I mean, let's face it, there's not a whole lot going on right now, even to the point where people are asking, what do players do right now? Well, I think they're trying to stay at least in peak condition, but they're vacationing. This is the last kind of downtime, and then training camp, and then it's off to the races, So in between this time, what do you talk about? Well, NFL Network's talking about, this is the tweet, but it was like a 2.5-minute segment, of course, Nate Burleson and all these other guys and Kay Adams and that. They're talking, and you need a game-winning drive. Which QB are you turning to, Brady or Montana? With an emoji. It's like the clever emoji that has like the hand on the chin, like it's in deep, I don't know, is that Socrates statue thought? You know what I mean? And I'm like, yeah, this is hogwash. Montana? Brady? When the game is on the line. What does that mean to you? When the game is on the line, to me, that means you have to win in the fourth quarter or have a game-winning drive. Those aren't the guys I think of. Obviously, being a homer for the Pittsburgh Steelers, I think of Ben Roethlisberger right off the bat. And I'm like, am I incorrect in thinking this? Because one guy that I've always thought about, and this goes back to my Madden days, playing in the, on the PlayStation and stuff, was John Elway. I actually used to play, believe it or not, I didn't always play with the Steelers, and it's because they weren't always that great. It was fun playing with like Cordell Stewart, throwing the ball around and running with Slash and whatnot on some of those Madden games. But for the most part, I don't know that we always, this is a good question for our audience. Do you always, for those of you who play football video games, do you always play with your favorite team? I'm assuming maybe 90% or better of the people who listen to this show are actually Steelers fans or know someone who is. Maybe they just enjoy the background noise. Do you play with your favorite team? Do you play with the Steelers, Brian? I mean, sometimes I don't want to. Recently, yes, they've been good, right? They've had the skill players and you could compete. But sometimes on the video games, it's not a fair matchup.
Doesn't matter. I do not play any other team. I ever. If I'm playing college ball, I'm playing Ohio State. If I'm playing pro, I'm playing the Steelers. Remember, it isn't even about the actual game. To me, it's about being, Dan Rooney. I just want to own the team. I don't care so much what else is going on, but I will admit it's more enjoyable when I can win 17 Super Bowls in a row on PlayStation 4's Madden. But,
on like super rookie mode or something, like what's the easiest of the easiest? Is it like toddler?
No, I don't play that. I don't play the highest level, but I don't play the lowest level. But I admit that I do tend to boost all my stat guys up to 99s. Because it's not about fairness. I just want to destroy everyone.
You know what's kind of funny now that you just brought that up? And I don't know that I've mentioned this on the show. I may have, but this is a stat that's always stuck with me. And this may be going back. This is one of the Bill Cowher Steelers teams when Ike Taylor was either a rookie or a second-year player. He was the lowest rated overall player in Madden football in the video game. And it just made me think, it's like I could see Brian here playing back in the day and boosting Ike Taylor up to 99 or Artie Burns and, getting these guys up all in the 99, and then Artie Burns has like 20 picks in a season and, you're leading the league and everything. And that's the thing I always had a problem with playing those games is, speaking of leading in stats and stuff, and we're going to get to this thing with the NFL Network question here, but when I played those games, it was like, it was super unrealistic with the stats. That's where I felt with this tweet. It was like, well, wait a second. I shouldn't say a tweet. It was a segment. It was a segment on like their Good Morning Football. But they happened to tweet it out, and I happen to have it on an article if you want to look, because I know speaking out loud and talking about some of these stats, it'll make your eyes crisscross. It's hard to always say these stats here. So I'll try and make it as simple as possible for the listening ears that can't maybe see it. But if you want to actually see a table of all these comparisons, it's over on the website at steelcityunderground.com. Anyway, I was thinking to myself, Joe Montana, it never even occurred to me. Like Tom Brady, not necessarily. Like I get these guys are great quarterbacks, and practically everyone that I'm going to name on this list that compared past and present, great quarterbacks. But I'm like, where does Ben Roethlisberger compare to this? Because, I mean, do you think first offhand, Brian, that when you think of game-winning drives, does Ben come to mind? I mean, he does for me.
Absolutely. Look, I mean, if you watched the Cardinals Super Bowl, there's no way it doesn't come to mind. I mean, it may have not technically been a game-winning drive because it didn't end the game, but you don't win that game without that drive.
Yeah, I mean, I get clutch quarterbacks, but I was really stuck on this is their exact words here when the game is on the line, and I said the correct answer is Ben Roethlisberger, to which actually got quite a bit of response from that, even from a few Steelers, believe it or not, that are hiding in the shadows and may even listen to this show. I see who you are. I won't call you out, though, but I see you, and thanks for your support. But yeah, I took exception to all this, obviously, because I'm a homer. And I mean, John Elway, right? John Elway has the comeback drive in the AFC Championship game against the Browns, and I think that one may come to mind just because I know so many Browns fans. My wife's a Browns fan, and even though she's younger, people in her family are still, they're dwelling on that. They still dwell on it to this day. And and Elway obviously did it against the Steelers too, and it's happened there. But I wanted to compare some things. So just some ground rules here. I didn't count playoff games. So, yeah, the Super Bowl, obviously, those type of drives, those are a big deal, right? But I really the only thing when you're looking up these stats that make it any easy is they're all compiled usually with regular season statistics. So that's all I used. Winning fourth quarter comebacks, okay, and game-winning drive percentages, and they're derived from games that these quarterbacks have started, not necessarily just the games that they have played. So there's not very much a discrepancy with some quarterbacks. Some quarterbacks have started or played started every game they've played. Some have not, including Ben, believe it or not. He came in for Landry Jones once. And his rookie year, too, So, there's some guys who sat on the bench like Aaron Rodgers that once they came in, then they've played like every game in their life. So, I mean, even Montana, to that kind of respect, I'm going to put there, has played in 192 games, but he only started 164. Brady, 269, nice, to 267. So he started all but 2 games that he's actually played in. Same with Ben. Ben is at like 216 to 214. You look at the win percentages, obviously Montana and Brady are some of the winningest quarterbacks of all time by virtue of the dynasties that they played on. So I kind of factored all of this in because there's going to be a few names here where you're going to do a double take. If you hadn't realized this before, this may come as a surprise to you. So, and I tried to include as many modern era and current players that came to mind. I understand there's some other quarterbacks that are out there, guys from the 70s and 80s maybe, but the league is totally different than what it was. I tried to get guys that are mostly in passing offenses at the very least, or are known for throwing the football. I mean, I'm not including there's other guys too that have thrown for a lot of yards in this league, like Kerry Collins. He's not on the list, okay? Yeah. Dan Fouts, he might be a Hall of Famer, but in this era of NFL, his stats look paltry. So I wanted to do that, but I did include Terry Bradshaw just to see where Terry Bradshaw was in all this. And obviously they play more games now than they did, ages ago back, when you wore a leather helmet and played, Brian. So,
yeah. Okay.
So, I mean, just breaking it down just quickly between Montana, Brady, and Roethlisberger, if you look at fourth quarter comebacks. Now, Roethlisberger has played more games than Montana, but he has not played more games than Brady. Brady has about 50 more games. Ben has about 50 games on Montana. So I had to do percentages, and that's why I did it with games started, because I felt that this was more attributed. If you do games played, all the percentages would just go down, and it wasn't fair because the quarterback may have not played the whole game. Maybe there was some other bum that they came in for, or maybe they got hurt, and some other guy came in, and then he was the bum, and they lost the game. So that wasn't necessarily fair to the percentages. But fourth quarter comebacks, as far as Montana, Brady, and Roethlisberger, Montana's at almost 16%. Brady, I'm going to round down to 13. Ben is at 14.5. Pretty cool. But game-winning drives, specifically, Ben Roethlisberger exceeds all of them with 19.6 to Brady's 16.5 and Montana's 17. So those guys are at 16.5 and 17 to Ben's about 19.5. He's actually at 19.63, nearing 20% there if you go in the other direction. That blew my mind. And when you put him up against Brady, has started 52 more games, I think, 53 more games. Ben only has 2 less game-winning drives. But yet the question is, Montana or Brady? And I think it's framed wrong.
Yeah, look, I have been saying this for years, and I will continue to preach it. Ben is a big-time situation quarterback. He's not a situational quarterback, but when you put him in a big-time situation, that elevates his game. Elway was that way. I will say Brady, to a certain extent, is that way. There are guys like, really, here you go. I'll throw my old school on you. Fran Tarkington was that way. But when I think of guys who I would want, it's not that Joe Montana wasn't a great quarterback. He was a great quarterback. He was a great quarterback on a great team when nobody else was playing football the way the 49ers were playing football. And but the people that come to mind for me are guys like Elway, guys like Ben, Brady to a certain extent, even guys who never won championships like Dan Marino or someone like Drew Brees even. That's the names that pop it. And Brett Favre. I don't want to forget Brett Favre. Those are the guys that I think of when I'm like, I need a drive to win the game. That's the guys I think of. And yeah, I think the question is completely framed wrong. And that doesn't surprise me because of where it came from.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's going to be my pet peeves. I don't want to get on the media just yet because that could be a whole other show with just the disrespect for Ben and the Steelers in general this year. I just think, well, I'll bring this up real quick, not to cut you off, but I'm going to anyways. The one thing is Ben gets ignored, even though last season he led in passes completed, pass attempts, pass yards, longest pass, interceptions, unfortunately, passing yards on average per game, pass attempts per game, passes completed per game. What else does this guy need to do to get attention,
I don't know. Win an MVP. That's everybody's nut gets busted over the MVP. And I no longer am quite as enamored of that award because it feels very popularity contest-ish. And the league MVP, people say it all the time. Oh, Ben never won a league MVP, blah, blah, blah. I don't care. I really don't care. If in my mind, if I'm on the, if I'm on the 2-yard line and I've got under 2 minutes left in the game and I need to win this game, Ben's my guy, man. You want to talk about an MVP? That's to me is the MVP. That's the guy I want. And, that's just, I don't know how anybody can see it differently. He's proven that he can, deliver in those situations.
It's kind of a shame. You go back a few years to that Dallas Cowboys game where it was like back and forth, back and forth. Remember it's like if they would have won the game, this would go down in infamy. The Boomer Esiason clone, that was Boomer, right? I think it was Boomer with the Jets against the Dolphins, I believe, where it was the fake snap or the fake spike, I should say, the fake spike, and then he tossed it to AB for a TD. Those type of plays, the immaculate extension, and obviously you mentioned the San Antonio Holmes in the back, such clutch plays, clutch quarterbacks, and most of these quarterbacks are. I wish you would have mentioned this when I was working on it. I didn't put Franz Harkington in here, so I don't have the percentages. I mean, he's had 33 game-winning drives. And he's had 29 fourth quarter comebacks over a career that spans 18 years, and he's had 239 starts. So I'm sure a lot of his percentages will, kind of fall into the average of quarterbacks that are either Hall of Fame or maybe Hall of Fame worthy. There's a few current guys on here that I don't know are Hall of Famers that have much higher percentages, and I believe that's just because they either haven't played that many games yet, or the weird thing is that they're losers. They play for losing teams. I mean, there's no other way of saying it. I mean, I'm gonna go with one right here. He's 141 starts. He has a win percentage of .468, so he's under 500 all time. About 18.5% of his games he's won fourth quarters, so 26 fourth quarter comebacks, about 18.5%. So he's higher than Ben by about 4 percentage points, higher than anyone else practically on the chart at 23.4% with 33 game-winning drives, and it's Matt Stafford of the Detroit Lions. Would you rather have Matt Stafford or would you rather have Ben Roethlisberger? Well, now you got this crazy question because, I just talked about pass attempts and pass yards, and Stafford is, gone off the charts with that in recent years, and he's got this huge contract, and everybody's like, why? Well, I don't know that necessarily he's a terrible quarterback. I mean, it obviously shows he has some grit. Now, he's thrown a lot of picks. Ben was known for a lot of picks and getting sacked like a piñata back in the day. Not necessarily. Now he's known as a pocket passer, apparently.
Yeah.
But, I mean, if you put Stafford with the type of support around him that, like, Ben Roethlisberger has, I don't know. Maybe he would be up there. So, but you know what? You got to see a little more. He has like 80 less games. When you get into the 200-ish range, I think it's a little more fair to make these comparisons. Like Andrew Luck just doesn't, to me, playing 86 games, He has a 16 winning percentage, so he's a winning quarterback. He has 16 fourth quarter comebacks. As a percentage of his starts, that's 18.6. He's practically second on this chart, and he's right behind Stafford, 20 game-winning drives for 23.2. So, I mean, he's like, 4.14 behind, Matt Stafford. Now, just to give everybody that's listening that can't see this, or visualize it, these two guys are like almost 3 percentage points higher than anyone else that I've done on this list. And this list is going to include some of the guys that you mentioned: Dan Marino, Drew Brees, Tom Brady, Joe Montana, Jim Kelly, John Elway, Warren Moon, even Terry Bradshaw, Brett Favre, Eli Manning, Aaron Rodgers, Troy Aikman, Steve Young. All these guys are on this list. And then you got some that's still current players like Matt Ryan, who's nearing that kind of games played with 174. He's a bit over 500 win percentage, 15.5%. So he edges Ben by about a full percentage point, fourth quarter comebacks, and he edges him by a full percentage point as well in game-winning drives. Would you rather have Matt Ryan as your guy? Matt Ryan, to me, pops off the page because I don't know about you, Brian, but when I was posed this and I thought immediately Ben Roethlisberger, John Elway, would you put Matt Ryan in the same conversation for, these clutch quarterbacks who win in the end?
Look, I think that this is early in his career, he got that nickname that I don't want to use, even though I love nicknames. I'm not using it for him because – I'm sorry, whatever that number was, 24,000 to 3, whatever it was, you're done with me. I'm done with him. No, I would not. I can't depend on him to win anything.
He's had a few seasons, a couple Pro Bowl years, quite frankly, where in 2010 and 2012, he's had a Super Bowl appearance, but these Pro Bowl years where he's had 2 seasons where he's had 6 game-winning drives in each. I don't think Ben's had that many ever in a year. His most were 5 in 2004, believe it or not. And I think that's immediately why that impression sticks with me right out the gate. 2008 he had 4, just 2 years ago he had 4. Most of the time he has about 3. So 4 game-winning drives in a season is about a quarter of the year. I mean, that's quite impressive in and of itself that anybody could do that. For the most part, he has 3s for most of it, and there's a few seasons with 2 or 1. And one of the low years here was 2015, where he missed 4 games or so, and then I think that may have even been the Landry Jones one where he came in relief. And then 2011, where they actually had a good year, they went 12-4. They were probably building a lead, and that's something that is kind of important with this stat too. Is that your team actually has to trail and fall behind. And I don't know that Tom Brady plays in a lot of games where their team necessarily falls behind and they have to come back. So I want to give him a little bit of credit there, because even with the 53 extra starts, they play the Bills, Jets, and Dolphins twice a year. How many of those games do they fall behind in? Honestly, you know what I mean? It's so I mean, some of this is relative, but I mean, I think it's still a good statistic to look at. I mean, it is a statistic, so that's all you can really compare is the numbers.
Yeah, I want to bring up, you were talking about Matty Ice's, oh, damn it, I said the damn nickname. Game-winning drives in a season, and it made me think, because you brought up Matt Stafford, and I think he's actually the guy who has the most game-winning drives in a season ever with 8.
Yes.
And Drew Brees has 7. And then you start to get to guys like Derek Carr, puke vomit, and Jake Delhomme. And do you remember the Magic Man, Don Magikowski?
Yeah, he's there too. He's
and a guy there. We haven't, we probably should, and I would probably think of him if I thought hard enough. But we probably should have mentioned Peyton Manning.
Oh, he's coming.
He did it. He did it a lot. But it is interesting that Ben is well down that list. You're right. He's not had anywhere near those kind of numbers in a season. But part of that is because when your defense is really terrible and it's just constantly score, and you're the cardiac kids. I actually wanted to look at this because I thought, Bernie Kosar and the Browns used to have that cardiac kids,
yes,
moniker, and I wanted to see where he ranked, and I haven't actually looked yet. I haven't found him in there.
almost entirely that one season, 1986. He had 6 game-winning drives, and there were seasons he went without one entirely. And of course, the tail end of it, he had like pretty much a period between like 85 and. What do you want to say? I'm trying to think when Vinny Testaverde first came in there and started bumping him for playing time, like 92-ish or something, early 90s. And then he ended up with the Dallas Cowboys as a backup, got his ring, and his later years pretty much did, spot appearances with the Miami Dolphins, so you got to kind of toss some of that out of the window. Bernie only started 108 games though, and he had 16 winning drives, but I mean it was mostly his second year in the league. His first 2 years in the league, he had 8 total. So I mean he's there. One of the guys that's actually on the list here. It's funny that you mentioned that Brian Sipes on there too. But I mean that's for a single season, game winning drives in a single season. Fourth quarter comebacks too. I mean, Ben's in there, but Stafford has it with 8 and Derek Carr with 7. Peyton Manning is on this list. He's just behind actually Russell Wilson, who only has 112 starts. Russell Wilson, also winning quarterback, 6.76 percentage so far, has 17 fourth quarter comebacks, 23 game winning drives. That's good for about 15 and 20.5%. And that just kind of the game winning drive deal nudges Peyton Manning just slightly. Peyton is a little higher than even Matt Ryan or Russell Wilson at 16.2. Ben is at 14.5 here for fourth quarter comebacks. And Ben is just slightly, that 20.3 of Peyton Manning's just slightly above 19.6 for between Ben and Peyton. That's not even a full percentage point between them. Peyton, 265 starts in his career and 702 win percentage, which is, there's only a couple of guys on this entire list that has 700 or higher, and, Brady being one of the other ones. It's who do you want out of the guys who win, and you got to look at how many games Peyton Manning played. He played an awful lot of games. He's definitely a field general and somebody that is mentioned on here. And to be completely honest, I drew a blank earlier. I know Elway, I always think of that, and I was thinking of Ben. But Peyton Manning's somebody that was really slighted. If you really want to get conversation going, they should have really asked Peyton Manning or Tom Brady.
Yeah, I agree. Look, I think that I probably would have had less concern with that, because if you're only going to pick 2 guys, fine. But it's an odd conversation to have, because I don't think you can exclude certain guys like Ben. And part of that, you talked about the competition that Brady had. Think about the competition that Peyton Manning had in the AFC South for most of his career. A lot of that winning percentage that goes along with these guys is partly based on that. I look at what Ben's winning percentage is, 6.76?
Yeah.
How many years did he play with every year, okay? It's like, that's 2 games against the Ravens every year, who are generally always good. That's 2 games against the Bengals, who have been at least moderately good. I won't talk about that other one. But it's always, it's always a given that they're playing first place or second place schedules. And while the Patriots do that, I'm sorry, they have 12 or 6 games a year that are cakewalks, or have been for them for many years. And that certainly boosts that winning percentage. I find Ben's 6.76 winning percentage a little more impressive than I find Brady's 7.75.
I totally agree with that, and I'm going to say the same, maybe in the same aspect here. The next guys on the list were Dan Marino and Drew Brees. Marino, 240 starts, Brees, 263. Marino with the better winning percentage. I don't know that Marino always had the greatest cast around him. There were times where he had fantastic teams, and there were times where he was making guys look really good that maybe weren't. And Brett Favre was famous for that too, but believe it or not, he's way further down the list here. And it's not to say, you mentioned the Ravens. I put Flacco on here and then I took him off. That's how bad his numbers were. And comparatively, okay, so he's had 163 starts, and I'm going to put this together in a second and get you the official Joe Flacco numbers, because I'm actually pretty curious Believe it or not just Flacco, but I want to see where Flacco. There's a name on here. I mean, Stafford might surprise you. Matt Ryan might surprise you. It's going to surprise everybody when we get further down this chart, and there's a name that everybody fawns over. You talk about, being on someone's jock, and everybody's on this one guy's jock. And I should just name him, but I'm going to leave him for practically last because I like cliffhangers. But anyways, Marino. 13.75, so he's behind Ben about 3/4 of a percentage point here, and fourth quarter comebacks. And Breeze is actually a little further back, over a full percentage point, almost a percentage and a half at 12.93. But overall, Marino's had 47 game-winning drives out of those 240 starts. Ben has had 42. So Marino, percentage-wise, game-winning drives is just short, like 0.007 of a percent of Ben, and that just tells you how good Ben is. When you compare him as being that clutch to somebody like Dan Marino, holy cow! And Drew Brees is there too, but he's at 18.25, so he kind of trails off, and then everybody starts to fall into like the 17, 16s and or lower as we fall down this list. But most deservingly, as I look at this right now. I don't think I would put Matt Stafford in Hall of Fame conversation. Andrew Luck certainly has not played enough to do that. Matt Ryan, he was starting to make a case for himself being a top quarterback in the NFL, but I don't know that he's necessarily reached that higher echelon yet. Russell Wilson, I adore, but Russell Wilson needs more of a body of work, and I think a lot of people think of him as they thought of Ben, like a mobile quarterback back in the day. So you get into this cluster rate, outside of those four, it's Peyton Manning, Ben Roethlisberger, Dan Marino, and Drew Brees, and that's good company to be in.
Yeah, it's real good company to be in. And I think, again, it'll be interesting to see how over time with Luck, even with the top four, it'll be interesting to see when their games played numbers match up to Manning, Roethlisberger, Marino, and Breeze, whether they're still in those same positions or not.
Yeah, exactly. And as I pull up the elite Joe Flacco's numbers, 18 fourth quarter comebacks, 24 game-winning drives on 100. He started every game he's played in 163. So Flacco kind of falls into some of the lower tier here. We're not quite there yet because there's some other names on the list. And believe it or not, Flacco actually does compare. Oh, this is going to be great when I bring up the bottom three on this list. I mean, it's really, really eye-opening. But, following this, so we've had Stafford, Luck, Ryan, Wilson, Peyton Manning, Big Ben, Dan Marino, Drew Brees. We now get to Jim Kelly, a Hall of Famer, 160 games started. And, his fourth quarter comeback total is a little higher than Drew Brees, but he's cumulatively only had 21. Percentage-wise, he's a little over 13%. He falls a little shorter. Game-winning drives, 28. 17.5 is behind. So everybody here is sorted by game-winning drive by percentage of games that they started that they've executed a game-winning drive. So it's not necessarily by just the numbers, like 28, for example, for Jim Kelly, because if we do it we were looking at single season originally. We were looking at, career-wise, and then there's active. So when you go to game-winning drives for career leaders, I haven't necessarily named all of them yet, but I'm going to give you the top 10 because most of the guys have already been named. So it's Peyton Manning has 54 total overall. Drew Brees is second with that with 48. So it's surprising to see his percentages. He's a little bit further in the middle of the pack for those that we pulled the names out of the hat for. Dan Marino third, Tom Brady fourth. Brett Favre is fifth. We'll be talking about Brett soon. He's not in the bottom, though. Ben Roethlisberger, John Elway, Johnny Unitas, who I did not have on this because I had him as a way, I'm looking more modern era. So
right.
Eli Manning, that's another one that's going to pop up here shortly. Matt Ryan. You want to take a guess where Joe Montana is? It's just by how ludicrous of the statement is that they put on here. And Joe Montana has 28, and this is just cumulative, so it's not percentage-wise, but he's 21st overall, and he falls right in there with Jim Kelly. They both had the same amount, and also tied for 21st is Jay Cutler. So
I was going to guess 20.
So, yeah, I should have had you guess. I didn't want to put you on the spot there. What's actually funny is that just game-winning drives among active leaders. So these are the active players in the NFL. Obviously, the names we just named: Breeze, Brady, Ben, Eli, Matt Ryan. They've been playing a long time. Matt Stafford, he has a lot of them. Phillip Rivers right there. Okay, he was in that same class with Ben and Eli. Andy Dalton and Joe Flacco are tied at 8th for 24. So it's going to be interesting. And then Russell Wilson is 10th there. But, of course, that's why I have the game started, because Andy Dalton hasn't been playing, or Russell Wilson hasn't been playing as long as, Phillip Rivers or some of these other guys. So it was interesting to put it in there. But anyways, we had Jim Kelly. John Elway shows up on the list now. John Elway has had 40 game-winning drives out of 231 starts at 17.3. Warren Moon, a guy I think that does not get enough respect as well, believe it or not. I used to love watching Warren Moon. 203 starts in his career, 17.2, so 35 of his 203 game-winning drives. Joe Montana now shows up, and then Tom Brady right after him, and we've already mentioned their stats. So we are now, let me see, how many names deep on the list? It would help if I had a name column on this. So as I play around with the magic computer, least prepared guys, right? I actually was prepared today.
You're at number 14.
I am at number 14. So we've had 13 players so far. Eli Manning now that we just mentioned shows up as 14. 230 starts. He's an Iron Man pretty much, except for when Ben McAdoo was the head coach and a complete idiot there up in New York. Eli's late teetering right around 500 with 116 wins and 114 losses. So it surprises a lot of people because maybe he's not as good as he doesn't come to mind as being as good as some may think. I mean, he has some of the Super Bowl rings to back that kind of statement up, but this team's been hot and cold. He's had 27 total fourth quarter comebacks. It's like 11.7. He's starting to fall into the bottom here. 16.09, nice. 37 game-winning drives out of 230 starts. So as you see, some of these guys are in like the late 30s, early 40s when they have 200 and some plus starts in their career. Terry Bradshaw, 158 starts, comes in at 15 right after Eli Manning. Obviously, he won a lot more games, 6-7-7 as his win percentage, 14 fourth quarter comebacks, actually 23 game-winning drives, 14.5%. That's actually better than Brett Favre, Brian. But Brett Favre played a lot more. Brett Favre played 104 or had 140 more starts than Terry.
Yeah, it's a big difference. Well, come on. How many people still bring out that tired meme of Brett Favre's going to come back this year? And, there's a reason for it. No, he's not. But there's a reason, because every year it was like, I'm going to retire, cry. No, I'm not. I'm playing here.
Yeah, and you know what? He had like that 1 year where he played it with the Jets, and I almost completely forgot about that. The Jets will just take anyone off the scrap heap, won't they?
Oh, yeah.
Le'Veon. So anyway, they've always been that way. I mean, it just surprises me. I'm like, hey, I forgot that guy played for the Jets at one point. It's just pretty much anyone, anywhere. They've always been a team that, to me, that's always acquired someone through free agency. They've not drafted someone, and I'll get a Jets fan on here. They'll prove me wrong. They'll say something like Joe Namath or something like that. So, but anyways, yeah, Bradshaw. So Favre comes in here to almost 300 starts, 624 win percentage, but he's below 10% fourth quarter comebacks. But as far as game-winning drives, the actual drives. So this basically what this means too is where this stat is skewed, and why I mentioned both of these numbers is maybe they were leading in the fourth. They got to be down in the fourth quarter to have a fourth quarter comeback. But Brett Favre has had 43 game-winning drives, one more than Ben Roethlisberger, and he has 298 starts to Ben's 214. This is why Ben needs to be in the conversation, man. I mean, percentage-wise, Ben has had 5% more of games that he started in where he has executed a game-winning drive than a legendary player such as Brett Favre. We're already down to 16 on this list.
Yeah, look, people can throw out stats all they want, and you can the joy of stats and the reason that we have places like the wizardly world of PFF is because you can essentially make stats say anything you want to say.
That's what I'm doing.
Yeah, exactly. But so there's always ways to find an argument that this guy is better or that guy is better. But there are certain criteria that are key to a quarterback, right? The bottom line is, do they win, and can they win when the game is on the line? That, to me, is the measuring stick of any quarterback. If you can win when the game is on the line, can you produce when everything is going against you, and all the defense has to do is come up with one stop, and you've lost. And for Ben not to get the respect that he deserves in those situations is insane.
I think it is. I think it's phenomenal to think about, Brett Favre and all the touchdowns, and we talk about MVPs and stuff, and everyone who ends up on these MVP lists and who people are always talking about as their top 100 NFL players of the year, and Ben's always an afterthought, which is it's just crazy to me to think about that when you look at some of these names that are on this list and where he ranks as far as being clutch. I understand that they were a running team at certain, points in Ben's career. It was a primary ground and pound type deal, but it still doesn't take away from the fact that he led these drives. You know what I mean? I'm starting to think here. Well, Brett Favre was a 3-time MVP too. You know what I mean? How many times has Ben won the MVP? I'm just,
zero.
Oh yeah. Anyways, here's a guy. Here's a guy that was in an MVP conversation last year. Phillip Rivers. He comes in down here at 17, and I know he's been on some ho-hum teams, but no different. He had been around. He's had some decent franchises or decent rosters that he's been a part of, and he used to have one of the great running backs that I think doesn't get enough, enough credit, or doesn't get spoken of a lot, and he was already there. He was already established as a great running back too, and that's LaDainian Tomlinson. So when you brought Phillip Rivers in, Tomlinson had some of his best years too. You remember he had 28 touchdowns one season, 1,800 yards. I mean, it was just absolutely wild. Guess what else Tomlinson did?
What?
Played for the Jets.
Oh yeah, I would have forgotten that, but I remember that now. Yep.
Yeah. So I mean, that's just kind of funny bringing that in there. But I mean, so it's not like Rivers has always been on skunk teams, but coming out of that same draft class, he's actually started at 6 less games than Ben. They're very comparable. Eli Manning's played in every game possible because he's just never been hurt, and he has almost a full season more. Actually, he does have a full season more of starts and games played versus Ben or Rivers, who came out of that same class. But Ben is the most winningest of the three, and Rivers is 118 and 90s, 5.67 for his win percentage. He's had some fourth quarter comebacks with 26. It actually ranks him a higher than Eli, than Bradshaw, than Favre, or some of them. But as far as game-winning drives, he's only had 30. He's just a smidge. He's an eyelash away from Brett Favre percentage-wise here. He actually falls behind, and all these guys fall behind. Bradshaw, Favre, and Rivers fall behind Joe Flacco, I just put on the list, with 163 starts every game he's played. He's 96 and 67. He has a better win percentage than Rivers, which totally tells you the picture of the Steelers had to contend with the Ravens all the time, too. It just totally comes full circle to what you were saying. Flacco has a better game-winning drive percentage than some of these guys, and then it falls almost sharply off a cliff when I get there. But can you believe Mr. Elite Joe Flacco is part of that conversation? He just lost his job in Baltimore. They shipped him off to Denver. I don't know. It surprised me. It didn't surprise me that he falls 18 on the list, quite frankly. But just to even put him in a top 20 or top 25 is actually, I think that's kind of surprising to me.
Yeah, it's look. I don't want to disparage him in this, but it's a little easier to maybe have some of these fourth quarter comebacks when all you're really doing is throwing the ball 90 yards and hoping for a PI.
And then it sets up Justin Tucker, who's one of the
Justin Tucker wins with a field goal, the best kicker in the history of the world, and all that stuff. But So I get it. I get it. I don't have much respect for Joe Flacco. Why would I? Because he's a Raven. But I do have a lot of respect for Justin Tucker. So, I guess it goes both ways. Anyway, what I'm going to love is what you're going to bring up next.
What, that you don't use the Ravens on Madden?
No, I abuse I go on Madden and set all the Ravens players to 0 or as low as I can get them, so that they're all a bunch of slogging turtles out there, and all you have to, your kicker could run for a touchdown, nice. 90 yards. It doesn't matter. But no, it's the next guy on the list. Because we've had conversations about this guy, both in the back room and on the podcast, where, the darling of darlings of the media has maybe doesn't necessarily deserve all of the accolades and darlingness that he gets.
Yeah, I mean, his win percentage is I'm going to say it's up there, because obviously it's nowhere in the Montana and Brady stratosphere. It's around the ballpark of Brett Favre. Ben has him edged by about 0.4 of a percentage point or whatever in win percentage. Again, he hasn't quite had all of the starts, so there's a little bit less of, it's still a career. All of these guys are below 200 starts, but their numbers for game-winning drives and fourth quarter comebacks are lower as well. And I was really surprised to see a 2-time MVP, a guy who doesn't throw many interceptions, a guy who is thought of as not only a great within his franchise and franchise history, but also is getting ranked up in the NFL, top 100. This guy is almost always in the conversation as number 1. And it's Aaron Rodgers. And I'm like, Aaron Rodgers has only had 14 fourth quarter comebacks. You think about his Hail Marys. If those drop, the game-winning drives, he's had 20 game-winning drives. If somebody drops a Hail Mary or two here, he's almost like not even on this chart, like non-existent. But he was one of the first names I looked up, and I had him higher on like my spreadsheet here, this like table as I'm putting it together, and then all of a sudden it's like, wow, Matt Ryan's better, Andrew Luck's better, Matt Stafford's better, Russell Wilson's better, just about Eli Manning's better, Joe Flacco's better. Look, when you have Flacco at 11% and Aaron Rodgers is at 8.8 in fourth quarter comebacks, Flacco has had 4 more fourth quarter comebacks, and he's only played 7 more games than Aaron Rodgers has. And Aaron Rodgers to Flacco, game-winning drives, Flacco has 24, 14.7 to Rodgers, who has 20. So 4 more game-winning drives, and it skews that to 14.7 versus 12.6. Should we be making the argument that Joe Flacco is elite when everybody loves Aaron? Now, I get Aaron Rodgers sometimes, the last few years, he's been banged up. Hasn't thrown for too many touchdowns because of being banged up. He's had some, fantasy eye-popping statistics for some of these seasons. If Ben didn't throw 16 picks last year and he only threw 6, maybe they would be talking about Ben the same way. No, they wouldn't. I mean, this is the whole point in this conversation is where the game is on the line. Aaron Rodgers, he really, aside from the Hail Marys, that's the only thing that should make you think about him.
Yeah, he's not even on my list of guys I would think of when the game is on the line. Aaron Rodgers is a good, solid, probably Hall of Fame quarterback. And I'm saying probably. I'm not even giving him the guaranteed, because I get it. He wins MVPs, and he wins MVPs because he's popular, and he wins MVPs because people love the way he plays, and the fluidity of the way he throws and his accuracy. And there's a lot of things to love about Aaron Rodgers. But to me, the bottom line is, do you win? And he doesn't always win. He's got a nice winnings percentage. I get it. But winning is not just regular season games. Do you win in the playoffs? Do you win in the Super Bowl? Do you get to the big game? How many times has he been there? 1. How many times has Ben been there? 3. How many has he won? 2. 1. Ben's won 2. You can't ignore these things when you start talking about your quarterbacks. And then you look again at this fourth quarter comeback stuff, and Ben's got more than twice as many as Rodgers. Yeah. Twice as many. I mean, who do I want? I want the guy who's done it. I want the guy who produces, and that's Ben. And I get it. He makes funny State Farm commercials, and he had his little championship belt catch thing and all that stuff. But I'm sorry. I am going to be in the camp that Aaron Rodgers is overrated. And I'm going to probably stay there for the rest of his career.
Oh, and I know. And you know what? That's going to get so much hate from certain individuals, and other people are going to be like, finally, somebody said it. It's not necessarily like if Aaron Rodgers was on the Steelers, I don't think I'd have a problem necessarily. And we talk about how there's not 32 starting quarterbacks in the NFL. I definitely think he's a starting quarterback in the NFL. So I don't want to go too far off the deep end here, but just looking at it when you frame it with game-winning drives, just so everybody's aware, Rodgers comes in 19 on the list here. Number 20 is Troy Aikman, and number 21 is Steve Young. Troy Aikman, who played just a few more games than Aaron Rodgers has so far in his career. Troy Aikman has a lower winning percentage overall, but had had the same amount of game-winning drives and has actually had one more fourth-quarter comeback. Steve Young has played less games than Aaron Rodgers, or less starts, I should say, 14 less starts. Way higher not way higher, but marginally better win percentage there. He has one less fourth quarter comeback and 4 less game-winning drives as part of that. And that kind of surprised me. But I know Young didn't necessarily, he was playing and splitting some time with Joe Montana at one period of time too. That's what made me think of Steve Young. Troy Aikman made me think of it because I'm thinking dynasties and stuff. Maybe the Cowboys were just beating the snot out of everyone, but it wasn't always the case with the Dallas Cowboys. But just to have Aaron Rodgers here and look at somebody like Andrew Luck, for example, a current player also who has 72 less starts and has the same amount of game-winning drives and actually 2 more fourth quarter comebacks than Aaron Rodgers. I mean, that really kind of paints a picture here. Where does Aaron Rodgers fall in all this? We make fun of Joe Flacco all the time. Obviously, we make fun of Andy Dalton, too. And Andy Dalton and Flacco were tied, like we said, 8th for active players with game-winning drives. Russell Wilson is 10th. Alex Smith is 11th, and Aaron Rodgers and Andrew Luck are both tied with 20. And right behind them, too, at 14 and 15 are Cam Newton and Derek Carr with 17 and 16. And Dak Prescott already has 14. I mean, it just kind of shows you, like, you kind of go from the cream of the crop at the top, Drew Brees, Tom Brady, and Ben Roethlisberger, and then once you get out of the top 10, it's like, well, are you really thinking Alex Smith? Are you thinking Alex Smith? Where would you put Aaron Rodgers? I think most people would just automatically assume that his greatness in winning 2 MVPs, that he would be in that upper echelon, and he's not.
No, and look, as I said, let me rephrase what I said. Aaron Rodgers will get in the Hall of Fame. Why? Because, as Sacktown Steelers would like to say, everyone in the world is on his nuts. So he will get in the Hall of Fame. But I still say, when you look at his overall body of work, it's fringe right now. It's fringe. It just is.
We had that conversation, we had the professor and Eric Herman and a bunch of us, a little round table behind the scenes talking about it. And it was like, is this really that much of a hot take? I mean, I don't know. So, I mean, it's pretty interesting, just some of the things. So I think when the game's on the line, I think Ben Roethlisberger is one of the top names, one of the best in the business at doing so. So I think we have a few news items just to toss in here at the end here, Brian. I think we found out that the player pathway thing, there is not going to be exemption for Christian Scotland Williamson. I don't know if it's a training camp exemption or just the entire season, but it doesn't seem like they could just stash him away.
I know, I'm sad. I'm very sad.
Yeah. So I mean, there's some stuff like that that we're talking about. There was a comment about with the Steelers wide receivers, and somebody said Mike Wallace wasn't shipped off. Mike Wallace most certainly was shipped off. They went with the Antonio Brown over Mike Wallace. They gave another guy the contract and said, "Sorry, no money for you. This is it. This will be your final year here." So I understand he went elsewhere and got big money, of which he didn't even finish his contract with the Miami Dolphins for all the money that he got signed. But it's most certainly cutting ties with a player. You're either not re-signing them, or in the case of a trade with some of the other guys that we wanted to say, Mike.
And I'm going to say this about Mike Wallace. It isn't that they didn't try and sign him either. The contract they gave to Antonio Brown, they wanted to give to Mike Wallace. He turned them down.
Yeah, exactly. And just one of the other notes, too, was, I don't know if we said something errant about Mike Hilton, but this is also confirmed per Bob Labriola of Steelers.com, is that I think we were talking about whether or not Hilton would still be at training camp and how's that work contract-wise and this and that. And I guess he has no plans of sitting out or pouting or doing any of the stuff that Mike Wallace did in his contract year. So he said he'll be there, contract or not. That's per Bob Labriola. So, Brian,
right. And
go ahead.
My question with that wasn't that I thought Hilton would try and sit out. It's whether he was even allowed to show up without a contract. And I hope that's correct. And the other part of that may be that because of the type of individual Mike Hilton is, maybe he just signs the tender and says, okay, we didn't get it worked out. I'll play this year for what I'm supposed to play, and we'll go from there. There's something in the back of my head that said, you can't go to training camp without a contract.
You know why I was thinking that? I'm thinking more or less insurance and liability. That's where my viewpoint is from that. I was thinking the same thing when Villanueva showed up, off-season workouts without a contract a few seasons ago,
right.
and someone else too. Whenever this comes up, I'm always thinking about that. And do they have to sign a waiver? What happens if they get hurt? You know what I mean? Then Mike Hilton gets hurt in training camp without a signed contract. Does he have any entitlement to the being waived or whatever, with injury settlement type thing? Or I don't know. Somebody with better knowledge of the contracts hopefully can point us in the right direction there. So just wanted to clear up a few things like that, because sometimes we get to rambling, whether it be about football or video games or football video games, and then we get scatterbrained. So that would be your at least prepared team in sports broadcasting, but we were pretty prepared today, and I think at least I know there's a few hot takes in there, and I'm sure there's going to be a quarterback or two somebody's going to be like, oh, throw them into here and see where they fall. But still, overall, even if you do, I don't think they're going to get into the Peyton Manning, Dan Marino, Ben Roethlisberger kind of stratosphere of this, and I do expect the numbers for Stafford or maybe even Matt Ryan and those guys. Maybe not Andrew Luck, because he has such a hot start, but I don't know. Their team's improving. I do expect them to taper off as they get more games played under their belt.
Yeah, I'm just happy to say that Ben is on our team.
Yes, absolutely.
He has his flaws, as do they all. But again, bottom line, if the game is on the line, there are very few quarterbacks I'd rather have than Ben Roethlisberger, if any.
Yeah, I'm totally with you, and that's the scary part of thinking that eventually this train's going to, stop somewhere. I don't know. Brady's still playing. He's almost as old as you. Ben's I know. He's not quite there yet. He still has about 20 years to go. But the reason I say that is Ben is actually the same age as me. So he's actually about 6 months younger. But we're both the same age. We're both 37. So I start to feel aches and pains just getting out of bed. I can't imagine being a professional football player and taking some of the hits that he takes. He's still signed for a little while. We'll see what ends up happening. I mean, I just want to see my man get some love and get in there in that same conversation. I mean, Peyton Manning, obviously, I believe is somebody that needs to be in that conversation. But Drew Brees is there too. He's just a little lower overall percentage-wise on those charts. And Drew Brees has been saddled with some bad fortunes over the years. Ben, though, out of everyone here, has never had a losing season. So I think you got to take that into consideration as well. There's very few quarterbacks that fall into that same category.
Absolutely true.
So, Brian, thanks once again for joining me, and we're up against it. So I'll let you get your last – well, I think you had your last thoughts, but do you have any other last thoughts?
I'm not as old as you say I am.
That's probably a very important clarification. Brian's not in the retirement home just yet, although I'm sure that's where his family will send him when he gets out of control, which could be any time now. So
that could happen any day.
Another one of these good morning football segments, and Brian's going to be locked up somewhere, sitting there in a wheelchair, reading his newspaper and telling kids to get off the lawn. So anyways, until next time, folks, don't forget to subscribe, to like the episode. We love reading your comments, most of them anyways. My name's Joe. His name's Brian. We encourage all of our listeners to be safe, be good, and we'll catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.